Greetings, everybody. It is a memorable time to be here. I know we're going to get a lot bigger, but we're getting bigger already, and it's both is good and bad. The bad part, obviously, is it wouldn't be getting bigger if the Earth were going downhill so rapidly. But the fact that people are rising up is what will tell the difference. I have here some cards. Yeah, okay, for this organization, EcoSocialist Horizons, and including a radio program we do, EcoSocialist Horizons Hour on GoPro Radio. For a while, I undertook to realize it as a consciously red-green synthesis of sorts, and in fact, joined up with the Green Party and worked with them for 10 years, mostly the decade of the 90s, and during that time, was a sacrificial lamb for the electoral campaign of 1998, where Chuck Schumer and I had it out with Alphonse D'Amato. And then in 2000, I actually challenged Ralph Nader for the presidency, and with predictable results. But the better man did not win, and at least the better idea did not win. I want to say something about that, and also about the fact that the socialist side of it, it's been productive. I've made many friends in both movements. I have no bitterness about any of this. I will say, however, that the essential feature of eco-socialism is a revolutionary doctrine, and being such, we have to be open to seeing it in a new and radical light. And I would submit that the traditional methods by which progressive people have attempted to come to grips with the question of nature, the environment, and relationships to economic activities and our future as a civilization, while they certainly have merit, they also have limits. And I feel very strongly about that. I think it's better for us to keep moving forward and recognizing that, as many have said, I think Richard Smith this morning said it very, very well. We are really not just in very drastic waters, but very uncharted waters. And we're going to look forward to many a surprise. As King Richard II said, there are many events in the womb of time which shall be delivered. And they shall be delivered in terms of the steady ecological collapse of our planet and the collapse and breakdown of the capitalist system, which has been hegemonic for so many years. It's very important to realize this in a theoretical way and also in a practical way. Just as it is clear that there are no market solutions to the questions of ecological degradation and ruin that lurk all around, so I would submit there are no electoral solutions. This is not this. Okay. I tried. I didn't do this a priori, you know what I mean? I had a lot of experience, and it's fun, but it made me realize the limits. Now, this doesn't mean these are limits that preclude any activity. That's stupid. And the point I want to get across is that there are multiform activities, and we should cultivate a way of looking at this business and this matter that frees us intellectually, spiritually, artistically, and also politically. And therefore, we should not look back to methods that not only haven't succeeded, but in many ways have positively failed. And I think this is tied up in the name of the organization that I was active in developing a couple of years ago, called EcoSocialist Horizons. And that's a very carefully chosen phrase. It indicates that this entity, eco-socialism, does not appear in a singular way and cannot appear in a singular way. And we have to allow for the many ways in which it will be appearing to different people in different circumstances in different places around the earth. I mean, I just finished a really exciting, wonderful panel on labor and eco-socialism. Excellent. But that is one horizon. Horizon from the position of somebody who has played a role in the reproduction of capitalism through the exploitation of his or her working, labor power. That's major. We need that. We need it for any number of reasons. Just think that that terrible disaster in West Texas would likely not have happened had there been unions there. If Texas weren't a union-free state, free is the wrong word, rid of union state, because it takes a worker to initiate a complaint to get this ridiculous OSHA bureaucracy to do something about it. OSHA hadn't done anything with that plan for 6 or 7 years, and that's because no worker had stepped forward, because any worker who would do so was risking his or her job because they didn't have a union. So in that very elemental way, we know we need unions, and we need them in many different ways as well. And before that, we had a wonderful workshop on indigenous folk, particularly indigenous folk of the native North Americans. And that's another horizon, multiple horizons, because there are different indigenous folk. There are different folk in different parts of the planet. And these movements are building and combining in unforeseen, unforeseeable ways all around the planet. So we want to keep that perspectivism going without losing track of fundamental principles, so that we can, so to speak, monitor, work with, communicate with, and keep building this movement that's can keep growing. Whether it's going to answer our dilemma is quite problematic, but as many of us have said, I think as all of us believe, the only alternative is nihilism, is eco-catastrophe, and is abandoning this planet, and for those of us who have children, our own offspring, to a horrible future. And I won't tolerate that, and I'll go down fighting, and I think you all should do that. And I think we needn't even go down. We have to realize that we have a great deal on our side, and 7 million people who are on our side, potentially. And there are a couple of concepts that I only heard sporadically in the first plenary, and I was unable to go to the first workshop. I had another engagement, but the second and third workshops, although to some degrees. And one of them is the notion of the commons, that we don't, we have to say that all of the horizons that we face are horizons which are, so to speak, inscribe an edge of a potential commons. And a commons means restoring, and there's a backward-looking but forward-moving motion inherent in eco-socialism, restoring a collective ownership, a collective relationship to the earth and to the planet Earth and to our own being as humans on that planet, that became sidetracked, underwent a wrong turn any number of years ago. Let's say 100,000, let's say 20,000, it doesn't much matter, but a wrong turn was taken. We feel that humanity did not have to turn out this way, but it's turned out in a world that is run by our most evil tendencies and our most evil people. But we can understand that, and one of the ways we understand that is by our alienation from each other and from the planet, and our separation and our loss of connection. And I'll go into that a little bit at the end, when I want to introduce a few concepts that might seem novel to some of you, but I think deserve reflection and inclusion. So the commons reflects the fact that we were once one with nature. And the process of evolution that came about the wrong turn eventuated in the capitalist system. It's very important now to emphasize, yes, capitalism is the driving force, the dynamo, the effective cause, as I say in my book on the enemy of nature. But it is by no means something that appears de novo. It itself builds upon former aspects of estrangement, and what it does is it constitutes a gigantic self-entrapment of humanity in the productions of its own hands and minds and brain and eyes and the rest of our bodies and our collective intelligence. That notion would also include something that I didn't hear enough of yet, and that I think eco-socialists have to be extremely attentive towards, and that is that eco-socialism is inherently a gendered phenomenon. It is not something that arises independently of the question of gender, and it's not something that's just tacked on to gender inequality, because that wrong turn that I mentioned before, which is the most archaic one, you might say, has to do with the ascension of, this is hypothetical, but we know something of the sort, with male hunting bands, okay, who overcome the earth and overcome the females and use the violent proclivities that nature has accentuated in the male genome. Set that aside. The point is that throughout history, that has been there, and that enters into capitalism, and how does it, and it enters into class society, all of which, of course, we can spend hours, and I love to talk about this, but I'm not going to. But there's the main point, of course, as you know or should know, capitalism is a peculiar aberration in which human production becomes turned away from itself through the introduction of money. It is the realm and the regime of money, and once money enters the human picture and it's combined with patriarchy and it's combined with class relations, it turns into this monster that eventually rules the world. And the capitalist system, we say, is a system of endless accumulation. Accumulation of what? Accumulation of capital. The key thing that capitalism produces is capital. It produces commodities in order to produce capital. All that's from our forefather Karl Marx, whom we must not forget, and whom I can only mention a little bit more in these brief statements today. But nevertheless, that coming to power of the money issue is a much deeper and more pernicious thing than it seems at first glance. Marx says of accumulation, with respect to the capitalists, says to accumulate, that is Moses and the prophets. Moses and the prophets. In other words, it's a religious impulse. Money is not simply used as an instrument, it becomes a false god, an idol. Marx develops this in the most profound way in the first chapter of Volume 1 of Capital, when after introducing the nature of the commodity and its two forms of value, use value being that which comes out of its relationship to nature in the mode of form of production and the way it's employed by its producers, and also exchange value, which is how it connects to each other. And exchange value becomes the accretions of which become extracted into monetary form, and off we go into that horrendous, hideous, but utterly fascinating history, okay? But the point is, Marx then says, interrupting the logic and stream of his flow in that first chapter, that we have here a situation in which the products of human hands exert a spectral power insofar as they become commodities that are produced by labor in the conditions of capitalist accumulation. Total genius on Marx's part. We do not pay attention to this nearly enough. He calls it the fetishism of commodities. The fetish is another word for idol. It's a part that stands for the whole and is worshipped as such. Okay? That fetish of commodities is the sign of our craving for things and our refusal of our being. He says also, in capitalist society, having is the dominant verb, being is a subordinate verb. In socialist society or communist society, being is the operative word, having becomes a secondary word. Later on we say the economy should no longer dominate society as it does under capitalism. The economy should be part of society as it is in traditional societies where communal relations obtain. So that's terribly, terribly important, because the fetishism of commodities, which if you're wondering how you get such a fancy term, can be verified simply by turning on your TV set and watching, you know, the 10 or 12 ads that take place in the halftime of a basketball game. No, the time out of a forget the halftime, the time out of a basketball game. And what they're doing, of course, is putting us on a treadmill to oblivion, because without that urge, which is not simply psychological, but it's psycho-historical, you might say, because it's tied up in the whole way we make our world, there would be no consumerism, which is what capitalism plays upon in order to increase its commodities and accumulate at all costs. And without consumerism, there would be no waste stream, there would be no reckless abuse of commodities, there would be no nightmarish extraction of wealth from the earth, and so on and so forth. There would be, in short, no ecological crisis, and we wouldn't be standing and sitting here worrying, what the hell are we going to do about it? Okay? So what we have to do about it is recognize it's not a simple psychological phenomenon. It's deeper, it has religious implications. And that leads me to a very basic point I want to make, which is I have yet to see in any widespread way the issues and matters of eco-socialism being treated as a spiritual question. A spiritual question where we no longer worship monetary form. As the gospel says, you cannot worship God and mammon. You cannot worship God and mammon. Okay, one or the other. So, the organizing we do in eco-socialism through its various horizons and its various points in which our life worlds insert into the global ecology are the ways in which we can redirect our own spiritual forces. And those spiritual forces have to be then reunited with the earth and with nature. Because along with, and this is just racing through a much bigger subject, along with use value and exchange value, we need to introduce something, and this is a major theoretical difference. We need to introduce something in eco-socialism which we call intrinsic value. And without intrinsic value, without that is to say, respecting the suchness of nature, which is parlayed in all of the indigenous world cultures, which is parlayed in all of the great world religions. We don't have to choose one or the other here. This is the eternal wisdom, okay, that there is an inherent value in simply being. Now, unless we get that value into our blood and organize around it, we cannot be strong enough to deal with the awesome challenges that lie ahead. Friends, we are going to face stuff that we can hardly imagine. There will be many deaths. There will be many catastrophes. I'm not an apocalyptic thinker, but I'm a thinker who tries to use the word that apocalypse also means, which is revelation. I think our breakdown in our ecologies should be a revelation. And I think that the future will have to belong to us, not organizing in a kind of a social democratic way, not organizing in a typical electoral way, except prefiguratively if we're going to move ourselves ahead, because the system is going to not let this happen to us unless we meet it head on, and we can only meet it head on with a fully activated being. So this is going to call for another heroic age. Overcoming eco-socialism is not a matter of technology. Overcoming climate change and ecological crisis is not a matter of technological fixes. It's not a matter of fixing this law and this regulation, except as prefigurative, as something that moves ahead and moves ahead and moves ahead and combines, because it's going on all around the world. And if I had a lot more time, I would spend it on describing how these institutions and movements put themselves together. And you can see that they are happening all around the world. And there are many conferences globally that are taking place now, and much hope amidst the gathering despair. Thank you.